2010 was our Allis Chalmers Expo. We were up bright and early this year on opening day to meet with some local news and TV personalities to discuss the highlights of our show.
In 1999, we purchased this machine and brought it back to our home in Iowa in the summer of 2000. In our garage, we tore it down completely down to the bare frame because most of the work needed to be rebuilt and strengthened. Those parts that we were not able to salvage, we were able to duplicate to make the machine like it was when it was new. Our son had been in the body business, was able to deal with the sheet metal and did a marvelous job of painting it. Our son-in-law was a contractor, and he built the soak tank and made the jig that we could put the wood in to make the new skis for it. This machine will run on skis and or the wheels, and the trailer runs on skis or wheels. The wooden skis are laminated, and we just put the metal skags on them, and that for the snow tractor. The ski for the trailer is metal clad, so it's wider. The trailer is built in the ambulance application so that it was meant to carry personnel and have a medical treatment. By removing the medical things, you can use that trailer as a covered cargo carrier, or they could use it to put the engines in that they used for starting the aircraft during the war years. As far as we know, this was only used in Arctic regions. Over the last 6 years, it's been to several shows in several states, and we're pleased to be able to present a piece of military history and American history so that those people who come afterwards are able to appreciate what the soldiers went through to maintain our independence.
One of the highlights of our show this year was in our expo building, featuring a number of Allis exhibits. We had a replica Allis Chalmers store, repair shop, and a number of other model and toy tractor exhibits to be seen. Allis Chalmers also created a hydrogen tractor. It is currently on loan from the Smithsonian Museum and can be viewed near Hutchinson, Minnesota. Allis Chalmers also made a number of other products besides tractors. A few of those items would be the electric generators that were used at the Pabst Brewery in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and also hydroelectric turbines that are used in the Hoover Dam. This WD-45 belongs to Jim Roney and was part of the 2006 caravan that drove from Hutchinson, Minnesota to Hastings, Minnesota for the Gathering of the Orange.
It's been a pretty good machine. The undercarriage is like new on it, and hasn't been welded on or cut on with a cutting torch any place. It's pretty original. I think the biggest thing for Allis was the torque converter drive and the power shift. That was, I think, it was a better system. When I had the opportunity to get this one, I jumped on it. I've only owned it about 3 years. In Waconia, Minnesota, on a farm, believe it or not. So, some big farmers down there by Waconia. They're close to the cities, and they have a number of gravel pits on their farm, and they used it to shove the black dirt back across the pits and reclaim the gravel pits. So it never really worked in gravel. It was always in black dirt, which is a big plus.
Carlson. I'm from Janesville, Minnesota. I own this in conjunction with my son Brad. Well, we bought that M4 at a farm auction about 6 or 7 years ago. We did a little research on the engine because we knew the engine was bad, and we found out it was a Waukesha 145. It's either GK or GZ, I don't remember which. And Brad, my oldest son, his brother-in-law's dad had an engine that we needed. It was either 145 GK or GZ, and the only difference between the two is the cubes. And I worked most of that winter just exchanging the engine and exchanging parts on them, transferring parts. The sheet metal on the side was missing, all the seats were missing, the ammo box in the back was missing. Good patterns, and we had the sheet metal made, produced by Allis Chalmers again. It came out of their LaPorte plant. The thing holds 125 gallons of fuel. The book says its nominal range is 100 miles, but we don't know whether that's loaded, empty, towing. The military calls it an 18-ton high-speed personnel carrier. The suspension underneath, they tell me, is the same as a Sherman tank. There was something like 51 or 5,200 of these made. To our knowledge, we have the only restored one in the state of Minnesota. It did take the better part of almost 2 years to get the project done. The main reason we bought it was because it was built by Allis Chalmers.
Okay, the machine's a 1936 22 by 38 Allis Chalmers threshing machine. It says Allis Chalmers on the side and it's painted orange, but it's actually an Advanced Rumley machine, or the design is the exact same as an Advanced Rumley. When Advanced Rumley became part of Allis Chalmers, they had all of these Advanced Rumley design machines left over, and Allis made around 480 of them out of leftover parts, and might have made a few more, but there aren't too many of them. Otherwise, it's the exact same design as a late 22 by 38 Allis Chalmers threshing machine. Got it out of Brainerd, Minnesota about 10 years ago from Jim Jackson, and threshed with it the next year. It hadn't been used for quite a few years before that. What kind of work have we done to it? It's got a brand new straw rack in the back. A farmer, he'd made a repair using a 1/4 inch bolt and a 3/8 inch hole. And in the back of those threshing machines, things shake around so much it didn't take long for it to give. And the whole straw rack, all 39 pieces of wood, 120 fasteners, went through the blower with a big, terrible noise. And a couple years later, we got around to it and built a new one. But almost every shaft in the back end of that machine is new. All sorts of things have been brazed up and bored out to original size. It's a nice, quiet running machine. It doesn't take a huge amount of power to run, and it does a good clean threshing job when it does work. It probably hasn't been outside many days in its life. And this year we probably ran, I don't know, 500-600 bushels through it, so it gets a fair workout too. New, I've been told it would have been paired with a WC tractor or something like that, that would have been just enough power to get the job done with that separator.
The engine and generator were both built in 1904 for the William Boxer Lumber Company. They ran for 54 years, from 1904 to 1958. The company began its electrification process in 1904, and December 31st, 1912 is when they decommissioned the predecessor engine to this one. 1958 is when they had line power became stable enough that they had shut down this engine, and the guy that put it to bed, when he knew it was the last time the engine was going to run, did not just shut it down and leave it sit. He put it to bed, and that's part of the reason why we've got the engine is in the condition that it's in, and we work to try to keep it that way. The engine and generator were both also underwater. In 1952 was Minnesota's first worst flood in history, and the company knew that the water was coming, that the floods were coming, since the engine was the heart of the company. If the engine didn't run, the company didn't run. That they put Cosmoline on the engine to preserve the engine while it was underwater. When the water subsided, they went back in, removed the Cosmoline off the vital areas so that they could get the company's heart running again, which was the engine and generator, so that they could have electrical power.
The Pabst engine was built in 1906 by the Allis Chalmers Company in Milwaukee, and it was installed at the Pabst Brewery, also in Milwaukee. And it was used from 1906 until 1968 when they retired it. The engine we have is one of two engines that were in the brewery, side by side. If you look carefully at the decking on our engine, you can see where the decking from the two engines tied them together. You could go up one stairway and get to both engines. The association acquired this engine in 1977, and in 1979 the rebuild began. Both these engines ran electric generators. They were never designed to run belts. They ran the electric generators, and they used the electricity throughout the brewery for whatever they needed it for. This is a 600 horsepower engine that made 480 volt three-phase electricity. Unlike what we use in our household as 60 cycle, this produced 25 cycle electricity. The reason for the 25 cycle electricity is it will start an electric motor under load better than a 60 cycle engine. After the main components of the engine were in place, then the building was built around it, and the final fitting of the engine, the smaller parts, was completed inside a building. This engine first ran in 1984. Production speed in this engine is 125 RPM. Usually during the show, we're only idling along somewhere between 25 and 30 RPM. A couple of reasons for that. When we're at a slower speed, you can see how the valving works and how things actually work much easier than if we're at high speed. Second reason, we have no reason to go full throttle and break something. This is a double-cylinder compound steam engine. The high-pressure cylinder has got an 18-inch bore and a 36-inch stroke. The low-pressure cylinder has got a 30-inch bore and a 36-inch stroke. Lower pressure needed the larger diameter so that you could get equal amount of power and balance one end of the engine with the other. This is different from some steam engines that the flywheel sits in between the two cylinders, and that confuses some people sometimes, and they think that, well, it's two separate engines and you could run one or the other depending upon the load, but it's a single engine and both pistons move at the same time. You cannot just run one or the other. The two rocker arms that you see are running the intake valves and the exhaust valves. On the right-hand side are the coreless intake valves. That's the snap release vacuum dashpot. That's the coreless patented valve design. And any time you see a snap release with the vacuum dashpot, you know you're looking at the coreless patented valve design. This was built by the Allis Chalmers company, and they probably had to pay some patent rights to the coreless company for using that design. It's 3 stories tall. You've got the main floor, the second to the first floor landing there where you can get around to the receiver, and then the top floor where you can get up and watch the valve works. We get 150 pound pressure steam from the Montana boiler, but right now, to run at this low speed that we mentioned earlier, our throttle valve is nearly closed. This engine is actually running on about 25 pounds of pressure once we get it going. Part of the design specification of this engine is it's a self-starting engine. On a steam engine, once the piston gets past halfway on the motion, if the valve timing is left in place, the intake valve is shut and you can't put steam on the side of the piston that you need to make it move. But this engine is designed and balanced in such a way that it's always supposed to stop before the piston gets to that halfway point on the motion, so that after you warm the engine up, you simply put the valve works in the correct location, close the drain valves that we use to warm the engine, open the throttle valve, and it'll take off and run. Occasionally, if our engine gets shut off and it hasn't been warmed up and loosened up real well, it will stop in a bad location. So then, after we warm the engine up, we'll have to manually hold the correct intake valve open so that we can get the engine running the direction we need it to run. And then once the engine starts turning, the person who's running that intake valve has to match the position of the rocker arm with the push rod to get the timing back in the right spot. This is a double-cylinder cross-compound steam engine. Double cylinder means it has 2 cylinders. Compound means it is a high-pressure cylinder and a low-pressure cylinder. The exhaust for the high-pressure cylinder goes over and feeds the low-pressure cylinder. So the steam has to expand twice before it is exhausted from the engine, and that was an attempt to make the engine more efficient. I shouldn't say attempt, that does make the engine more efficient. When we say cross compound, that means that we've got 2 separate crank pins and the 2 pistons are hooked individually to the crank shaft. We've got several generators on the showgrounds that are capable of producing electricity. The way this engine was designed, it produced 25 cycle electricity. And it's possible that we could rewire this so we could get 60 cycle electricity. The William engine next door is designed to make 60 cycle electricity. And there has been talk about we could produce our own power for the showgrounds. Several years ago when we talked to our local power company about that, they said if you want to do that, then you better be prepared to produce electricity 24/7 while you are running the show.